What existed before creation? The greatest question humanity has ever asked. Since the very beginning of civilization, humanity has tried to answer one impossible question. What existed before everything? Before the stars shined in the sky, before the earth even existed, before time itself began to move forward, what was there? The Bible opens with a direct and powerful answer. It does not begin by trying to prove the existence of God. It simply declares, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That means that before matter, energy, light, and the entire universe existed, there was already an eternal mind. There was no absolute emptiness, no endless silence without meaning. There was God before time existed. One of the most astonishing concepts is that God did not appear inside time. He existed before the universal clock ever began to move. That completely changes human logic, because everything we know has a beginning. Stars are born, people are born, planets are formed, empires rise and disappear. But the biblical narrative introduces a being without origin, without creation, and without limits. While science searches for what existed before the Big Bang, the Bible presents God as the one who already existed before any cosmic explosion ever happened, the moment that changed everything. Then comes the most important moment in history. Absolute silence is broken by a simple command, let there be light. And instantly, darkness is torn apart. The idea here is not only the birth of physical light, but the beginning of reality itself. The universe begins to exist because a voice decided it should exist. It was not an accident. It was not chaos without direction. It was a conscious decision. Creation as the organization of chaos. After light comes an astonishing sequence of organization. Separation between light and darkness. Creation of the atmosphere. Appearance of the seas. Emergence of dry land. Birth of plants. Creation of animals, formation of humanity. Everything follows precise order, as if the universe were being prepared like a stage before a grand performance. Nothing is created randomly. Everything carries order, rhythm, and purpose. Humanity was not created as just another animal. When the narrative reaches humanity, the tone changes completely. The Bible says that man and woman were created in the image of God. That means they were not made merely to survive. They were created to govern, manage, and represent the Creator within creation. They were given intelligence, consciousness, authority, moral capacity, freedom of choice. The Garden of Eden. God places the first couple in a real place. The Garden of Eden. The text mentions specific rivers such as the Tigris and the Euphrates, showing that the narrative attempts to connect paradise to the real world. In Eden, there was no death, there was no fear, there was no anxiety, there was no suffering. Humanity lived in perfect connection with God, but there was one single rule, the forbidden tree. At the center of the garden stood a forbidden tree. The command was clear, you may eat from every tree except this one. The test was not about food. It was about authority. If humanity obeyed, they would recognize God as the supreme ruler. If they disobeyed, they would be declaring independence. It was like saying, we no longer need you to decide what is right and wrong. And that is exactly where the story of humanity begins to change dramatically. The creation of the world in the Garden of Eden. The universe emerges from chaos. After the first command was spoken, let there be light. The universe stopped being a formless void and began transforming into a perfectly organized system. The Bible describes creation as a precise sequence of construction. First, God separates light from darkness. Then he divides the waters and creates the heavens. Next, dry land rises from the primordial ocean. The stage of the planet was being prepared like someone carefully building a set before the beginning of a great performance. Nothing feels improvised. Everything has order, rhythm, and intention. The explosion of life. Once the structure of the world is ready, life begins to appear. Plants cover the land. Trees filled with fruit emerge. The oceans begin to swarm with living creatures. The sky fills with birds. Animals begin occupying fields and forests. The narrative communicates the idea of absolute abundance. The planet was not a hostile environment. It was a world designed to sustain life in fullness. The creation of humanity. Then comes the central point of creation. Unlike the animals, humanity is not created merely through a spoken command. The biblical text completely changes its tone. God forms man from the dust of the earth and breathes into him the breath of life. That detail carries a powerful message. Human beings possess something different from the rest of creation. They were not made simply to exist biologically. They were created with consciousness, identity, rationality, and spiritual capacity. Then woman is created. The Bible presents a creation of woman not as inferiority, but as a perfect complement. Humanity was now complete. The Garden of Eden, the center of the perfect world. God places a man and woman in a specific place called the Garden of Eden. Eden is not presented as a distant spiritual realm, but as a real location connected to ancient rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates. The garden is described as fertile, secure, abundant, harmonious. There was no hunger, war, disease, suffering, fear, death. Humanity lived in total harmony with nature and with God, direct relationship with God. The most astonishing part of Eden was not the trees or the rivers. It was a direct connection between the Creator and humanity. There was no spiritual separation, no guilt, no shame. Adam and Eve lived in perfect fellowship with God. The narrative communicates the idea that humanity was created to walk beside the Creator without fear. Humanity's first mission. God gives a couple a responsibility to govern creation. They were meant to care for the earth, manage the animals, expand life, develop the world. Human beings appear as God's representatives within creation. Eden was only the starting point of something much greater, freedom and the command. Even in a perfect world, God establishes a boundary. At the center of the garden stood two important trees. The tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The instruction was clear. You may eat from every tree except the tree of knowledge. That command introduces an essential element, free will. Without choice, there could be no genuine love or authentic obedience. Humanity had the freedom to remain faithful or reject divine authority. The meaning of the forbidden tree. The tree was not merely an ordinary plant. It represented a test of trust. If Adam and Eve obeyed, they would acknowledge God as the source of truth and morality. But if they ate the forbidden fruit, they would be attempting to seize control over their own existence. It was a silent declaration. We will decide for ourselves what is right and wrong. And it is at that very moment that the perfection of Eden begins to face its greatest threat. At the edge of that paradise, a presence watched silently, ready to turn doubt into destruction. The fall of humanity and the entrance of evil. The perfect world was about to break. The Garden of Eden seemed untouchable. There was no violence, no pain, no death. Humanity lived in perfect harmony with God and creation. But at the edge of paradise, a silent threat was watching. The Bible introduces a creature described as cunning and deceptive, the serpent. It does not attack through physical force or violence. Its attack will be psychological, because destroying humanity did not require a war. It only required planting a doubt, the first distortion of truth. The serpent approaches Eve with an apparently innocent question. Did God really say that? That is the first step toward the fall, making humanity doubt the word of the Creator. The strategy was brilliant. The serpent does not begin by directly denying God. First, it distorts the truth. Then it turns obedience into something negative. The serpent suggests that God is hiding something important from humanity. as if the Creator were limiting human potential. The temptation of independence. Then comes the central lie. You will not surely die. The serpent offers something seductive, complete independence. It claims that by eating the fruit, Adam and Eve will become like God, capable of deciding for themselves what is right and wrong. The temptation was never merely about a fruit. It was about absolute autonomy. Humanity wanted control over its own existence without depending on the Creator. The moment of disobedience. Eve looks at the fruit and sees beauty, desire, knowledge, power. Then she eats. Afterward, she gives the fruit to Adam. At that instant, the biblical narrative describes the greatest rupture in human history. Sin enters the world, and with it come immediate consequences. Shame appears for the first time. Immediately after eating the fruit, something changes inside them. Innocence disappears. Adam and Eve realize they are naked, and for the first time they feel shame. This moment is symbolic and deeply profound. Sin did not only destroy their relationship with God, it also destroyed the way they viewed themselves. Now there is guilt, there is fear, there is insecurity. Humanity, which once walked freely with God, now tries to hide. Fear replaces fellowship. When God calls out to Adam in the garden, the answer reveals humanity's internal collapse. I was afraid. This is the first time fear appears in the biblical narrative. The perfect relationship had been broken, and then another devastating effect of sin begins, the shifting of blame. Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent. No one takes responsibility. Division officially enters the human experience. Death enters the world. The warned consequence finally arrives. Death now exists. Until that moment, Eden had been a place without suffering or destruction. Now creation itself would be affected. The ground becomes hostile. Work becomes painful. Pain enters human existence. Sin did not affect only individuals. It contaminated the entire system. Expulsion from the garden. The saddest moment of the narrative occurs when Adam and Eve are expelled from Eden. Cherubim and a flaming sword guard the entrance to the tree of life. Access to paradise is lost. Humanity would now live in a world marked by suffering, aging, violence, death. The separation between God and humanity had begun. Evil was not part of the original plan. The biblical narrative makes one idea very clear. Evil was not part of the original creation. It emerged as a consequence of human rebellion. Pain, fear, guilt, and death appear after disobedience. From that moment forward, the entire biblical story revolves around one great question. How could what was destroyed in Eden be restored? And that is exactly where the plan of redemption that runs throughout the entire Bible begins.